While much of history has focused on the great leaders of the Mongol Empire, particularly figures like Genghis Khan, one of the most remarkable, yet often overlooked, aspects of Mongol life was the role of women in both nomadic society and the empire itself. In many cultures, women were often relegated to subservient roles, but in the Mongol world, women played an essential part in the survival, strength, and governance of their people. The nomadic Mongol society was built on a foundation of equality between men and women, at least when compared to many other cultures of the time. This was largely due to the nature of nomadic life, which required collaboration between the sexes in order to survive the harsh conditions of the steppe. Both men and women were involved in herding, camping, and maintaining the yurts that were the core of their existence. Women were responsible for essential tasks such as milking animals, cooking, and making clothing, while also playing key roles in sustaining the household. In a society where movement and flexibility were paramount, the strength of family units, supported by both men and women, was the key to survival. However, women in Mongol society were not limited to these domestic roles. As the Mongol Empire expanded under the leadership of Genghis Khan and his successors, women played increasingly important roles in governance, diplomacy, and military strategy. Their power and influence extended far beyond the confines of the family unit, and they were often entrusted with significant political responsibilities and military leadership positions that were largely unheard of in other parts of the world at the time. Women in Mongol leadership, bold, resilient, and powerful. One of the most notable figures in Mongol history is Khatan Sorgatani, the wife of Talyui, Genghis Khan's son, and mother of Kublai Khan, the future ruler of the Yuan dynasty in China. Sorgatani was not only influential within the Mongol court, but also played a pivotal role in shaping the future of the empire. After the death of her husband, she became the regent for her sons, ensuring their survival and eventual rise to power. Her political acumen and leadership abilities were crucial in maintaining the stability of the empire during a time of transition, and her role in Mongol governance was instrumental in ensuring that her sons would inherit power. Kublai Khan, who became one of the most famous Mongol emperors, was significantly influenced by his mother. Her wisdom, guidance, and strong leadership laid the groundwork for Kublai's eventual conquest of China and the establishment of the Yuan dynasty. Sorgatani's ability to navigate the complex political environment of the Mongol court, manage tribal alliances, and secure her sons' position in the empire demonstrates the essential role that women played in the empire's governance. Women were not merely figures in the background. They were active participants in the political machinations that defined Mongol leadership. Genghis Khan's daughters, for example, were instrumental in securing important alliances through marriages, often marrying off to key political figures in conquered regions. These alliances strengthened the Mongol Empire and helped maintain its cohesion, demonstrating that women were central to the Mongols' diplomatic strategies. Even Genghis Khan's own mother, Holon, was a critical figure in shaping his early life and success. After the death of her husband, Yesugei, she played a key role in raising Genghis Khan and ensuring that he could rise to power despite the hardships he faced. Her strength, leadership, and resilience were qualities that were passed on to her son, influencing his military strategies and his ability to unite the Mongol tribes under a single banner. The role of women in the Mongol military. The military was another area where Mongol women defied expectations. While the majority of warriors were men, Mongol women also played a crucial part in the military structure of the empire, both in terms of leadership and support. It was common for women to assist in maintaining supply lines, serving as spies, and even fighting alongside men during battles. One example of a woman in the Mongol military is Monk Khatan, the wife of Kublai Khan. She was highly respected in her own right and participated in military campaigns alongside her husband, managing logistics and providing strategic counsel. Women's involvement in warfare was not uncommon in the Mongol world, where a society of nomadic warriors valued strength, skill, and survival, regardless of gender. Women's influence on culture and religion. In addition to their political and military roles, Mongol women were also crucial in shaping the cultural and religious landscape of the Mongol Empire. Many women were deeply involved in the religious life of the Mongol people, especially as the empire encountered various belief systems across its vast territories. The shamanic traditions of the Mongols were often passed down through generations of women, with female shamans playing an important role in guiding their communities through rituals, ceremonies, and healing practices. Mongol women also had an important role in the arts. Mongol artisans, many of whom were women, created the luxurious goods that were traded along the Silk Road and became symbols of the Mongol elite. Women's expertise in weaving, embroidery, and crafting textiles contributed to the Mongols' distinctive material culture. These goods were not only practical, but also highly sought after, and the work of these women was instrumental in creating the aesthetic identity of the Mongol Empire. Modern legacy: the role of women in contemporary Mongolia. In modern Mongolia, the legacy of these powerful women continues to be felt. While gender roles in Mongolia have evolved in recent decades, women still play a vital role in the country's social, cultural, and political spheres. Women in Mongolia are highly involved in education, business, and government. Mongolian women have a strong presence in agriculture and nomadic herding, continuing the traditions that their ancestors established centuries ago. Mongolian society, while still predominantly patriarchal, has made significant strides in gender equality, with women in urban areas increasingly taking on leadership roles. The legacy of Mongol women warriors, leaders, and cultural influencers continues to shape modern Mongolian society, with women today drawing inspiration from their ancestors' strength and resilience. When one thinks of the Mongol Empire, it's impossible to ignore the staggering military prowess that allowed them to conquer much of the known world. The Mongols' ability to create one of the largest empires in history was not due to sheer numbers or brute strength, but rather a combination of exceptional military tactics, unmatched mobility, and a culture that placed great value on warfare from a very young age. The Mongols' success was built on an intimate knowledge of the land, the enemy, and most importantly, the horse, which became both their weapon and their strength. The Mongol military wasn't just a cavalry, it was a force of nature, built around the nomadic lifestyle that had shaped the Mongols from their earliest days on the steppe. The vast open spaces of the steppe, with their harsh winters and scorching summers, had forged a people who were resilient, resourceful, and most importantly, mobile. The ability to travel quickly and efficiently across large distances was a key component of the Mongol military success. Unlike other great empires that were heavily reliant on infantry or fortifications, the Mongols excelled in mobility, allowing them to strike at enemies when they were least expected. One of the defining features of the Mongol military was their use of cavalry. While most other armies of the time were made up of heavily armored infantry or chariots, the Mongols relied on light cavalry, small, fast-moving horses and troops that could maneuver quickly across difficult terrain. The Mongol horsemen were exceptional riders, skilled in the art of archery while on horseback, and their ability to shoot arrows with great precision at high speeds made them fearsome opponents in battle. The Mongol military was also incredibly disciplined. Their organizational structure allowed for swift communication and strategic flexibility. The Mongol army was divided into decimals, groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 soldiers, each with its own commander. This system ensured that the Mongols could coordinate attacks, withdraw quickly if necessary, and adapt their tactics depending on the changing circumstances of the battlefield. The ability to move quickly and make tactical adjustments on the fly was a hallmark of Mongol strategy. But what was it that allowed the Mongols to outmaneuver and outsmart their enemies time and time again? What made their military tactics so effective? And how did their way of life as nomads translate into military dominance on the battlefield? The answer lies in the adaptability and versatility of the Mongol warriors, who were not simply soldiers, they were strategists who could read both the land and their opponents with unparalleled skill. The Mongols were trained from a young age in the art of warfare, learning not only how to fight but how to think like a soldier, understanding the ebb and flow of battle, and using psychological tactics to gain the upper hand. Psychological warfare, the art of fear and deception. One of the most notable aspects of the Mongol military was their use of psychological warfare. Genghis Khan understood that the intimidation of the enemy could be just as effective as brute force. He employed various tactics to sow fear among his opponents, creating an aura of invincibility that often preceded the Mongol army's arrival on the battlefield. One of the most famous tactics employed by the Mongols was the feigned retreat. This tactic involved the Mongol army pretending to flee in disarray, leading the enemy to believe they had won the battle. When the enemy pursued, the Mongols would turn around suddenly, revealing their full strength and catching their opponents off guard. This tactic was especially effective against more heavily armored or disorganized armies, which could be drawn into traps and ambushed by the fast-moving Mongol cavalry. Additionally, the Mongols used deception and intelligence gathering to outsmart their enemies. The Mongol army was highly skilled in spying and scouting, and they often sent out small groups of scouts or spy networks to gather information on enemy movements, weaknesses, and terrain. The ability to learn about an enemy's position and tactics before engaging in battle gave the Mongols a critical advantage. But perhaps the most effective tool in the Mongol arsenal was their ability to adapt to each situation. The Mongols did not adhere to rigid battle plans. Instead, they were trained to think on their feet, responding to the shifting dynamics of the battlefield with speed and precision. The Mongol military could be both flexible and ruthless, striking when the time was right and retreating when the situation called for it. The Mongol horsemen, masters of speed and precision. The Mongol cavalry was the backbone of the Mongol military machine. A Mongol warrior's primary weapon was his horse, and the bond between man and animal was crucial to the success of the Mongol army. The Mongol horse was smaller and more agile than the larger European horses, making it more suited for the open steppe. These horses were able to travel great distances without tiring and could carry their riders across difficult terrain at high speeds. The Mongol horsemen were experts in mounted archery, able to shoot arrows accurately while riding at full gallop. This skill was honed from childhood, as Mongol children were taught to ride and shoot as early as 5 or 6 years old. The ability to shoot with both hands while riding made the Mongol cavalry one of the most formidable forces in history. Another key component of the Mongol cavalry was its mobility. The Mongol warriors could travel long distances quickly, covering vast areas in a short amount of time. Their ability to move across the steppe with such speed allowed them to outmaneuver their enemies, often attacking from unexpected directions or retreating just as quickly when necessary. This incredible mobility was essential in the Mongols' success. They could strike at their enemies with lightning speed, often launching surprise attacks and then disappearing just as quickly, leaving their enemies confused and disoriented. The Mongols understood that surprise and speed were just as important as strength in battle. The legacy of Mongol military tactics. The Mongol military tactics had a profound influence on the way warfare was conducted throughout history. The organization, mobility, and psychological warfare employed by the Mongols were adopted by many later military leaders, including Napoleon Bonaparte and Genghis Khan's descendants. The Mongols' success in creating a unified military force that could move rapidly, adapt quickly, and strike decisively is still studied by military historians today. Beyond the battlefield, the Mongols also revolutionized the way military campaigns were conducted. The Mongol practice of siege warfare, for example, was advanced for its time. They were able to sack fortified cities and overcome large defensive walls using a combination of siege engines, psychological tactics, and sheer numbers. Their siege tactics were adapted from their nomadic lifestyle, where they had to surround and overwhelm prey in order to capture it. In the end, the Mongol military was more than just an army. It was a highly organized, adaptable force capable of overcoming almost any obstacle. The nomadic Mongols took advantage of their mobility, strategic thinking, and psychological tactics to become one of the most successful and feared military forces in history. Looking back, the enduring influence of Mongol tactics. Even after the fall of the Mongol Empire, their military tactics lived on. The maneuver warfare they pioneered, their use of psychological tactics, and their ability to move swiftly across the battlefield had a lasting impact on military strategy. The Mongols proved that speed, flexibility, and precision could defeat more heavily armored or larger forces, and their influence continues to shape modern military thought. The Mongol way of war, forged in the harsh environments of the steppe, is a testament to the resilience, ingenuity, and adaptability of the nomadic people who changed the course of history. At its zenith, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire in history, spanning from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan and his descendants, the Mongols brought together vast and diverse regions, connecting China, Central Asia, Persia, and Europe. The empire's sheer scale and success were due in part to the Mongols' military superiority, but also to their ability to integrate a variety of cultures, trade routes, and ideas. This era is often referred to as the Pax Mongolica, a period of relative peace and stability that allowed trade, culture, and ideas to flow freely across the empire. The Mongol Empire's influence extended far beyond mere territorial conquest. The Silk Road, which had been disrupted by warfare and instability before the Mongols, flourished under their rule. With the Mongols, control, merchants, scholars, artists, and religious leaders from across the world interacted in ways that had never been possible before. The movement of people, goods, and knowledge made the Mongol Empire a catalyst for global exchange, fostering an era of cultural diffusion that would influence the world for centuries to come. The Mongols also revolutionized trade, communication, and administration across their empire. They established a unified currency system, standardized weights and measures, and ensured safe passage for merchants and travelers through a vast network of well-maintained roads. The Mongol postal system, with its system of relay stations and mounted messengers, became a model for future empires. However, despite the empire's extraordinary success, the Mongol Empire was not built to last forever. The very characteristics that made the Mongol military so formidable, the nomadic mobility, the flexibility, and the reliance on a unified leadership, were also the reasons why the empire would eventually fracture and collapse. The death of Genghis Khan and the division of the empire. The decline of the Mongol Empire began after the death of its founder, Genghis Khan, in 1227. Genghis Khan's death left a void at the top of the empire, and his successors, though capable, struggled to maintain the unity he had forged. Genghis Khan's empire was divided among his sons, and the lack of a single, centralized leadership created tensions between the different factions of the empire. These divisions, combined with the enormous size of the empire, made it increasingly difficult to govern effectively. Genghis Khan's descendants, including his son Ojdai Khan, his grandsons Kublai Khan, and Hulagu Khan, initially continued to expand the empire. However, their ambitions were often at odds with each other, and the empire began to fragment into smaller khanates. These khanates, each ruled by a different branch of the Mongol family, became more independent as time went on, and their rivalries weakened the overall unity of the empire. One of the major contributing factors to the decline of the Mongol Empire was the succession crisis. After Ojdai Khan's death in 1241, the central leadership of the Mongols was fractured, and a series of disputes over succession emerged. As a result, the Mongols became divided into several regions, such as the Yuan dynasty in China, established by Kublai Khan, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Russia, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. Each of these regions eventually developed its own political and military interests, leading to a lack of cohesion and a weakening of the Mongol Empire's central authority. The unity that had characterized the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan was further undermined by the different cultural backgrounds and administrative practices of each region. For example, Kublai Khan, who ruled the Yuan dynasty in China, adopted many aspects of Chinese governance and culture, which alienated some of the Mongol aristocracy. Meanwhile, the Ilkhanate in Persia embraced Islam, and Hulagu Khan's successors began to lose their ties to the traditional nomadic Mongol culture. These shifts created further fragmentation within the empire, as each region moved toward greater independence. The strain of overextension, the Mongol Empire's vastness as its weakness. While the Mongols were unmatched in their ability to conquer and expand, the very size of their empire became a burden. The Mongol Empire's vastness made communication and control difficult, especially as the empire expanded to regions far from the central authority. The distance between the Mongol heartland in Mongolia and the newly acquired territories in Europe, China, and Persia posed logistical challenges that the Mongols were unable to overcome. The vast size of the empire also put a strain on the economy. The Mongols depended heavily on the resources of their conquered territories, but as the empire grew, the cost of maintaining the military presence in distant regions became unsustainable. The Mongol cavalry, though formidable, was difficult to supply, and the nomadic nature of the Mongol military did not lend itself easily to maintaining control over settled agricultural societies. The lack of a strong infrastructure, coupled with the difficulty in moving troops and supplies across such a vast area, made it difficult to enforce Mongol rule in remote regions. Another factor that contributed to the decline was the inability of the Mongol leadership to integrate the conquered peoples into the empire. While the Mongols were excellent at assimilating new technologies, military strategies, and administrative practices from the cultures they encountered, they often struggled to fully integrate their subject peoples into the empire's political and social fabric. This failure to create a truly cohesive empire contributed to the internal unrest that eventually led to its disintegration. The plague and the end of the Mongol Empire. The Black Death, which swept across Eurasia in the mid-14th century, was another devastating blow to the Mongol Empire. The plague, which is thought to have spread along the trade routes of the Silk Road, decimated populations across the empire, including China, Persia, and Russia. Entire cities and regions were left depopulated, and the economic and social infrastructure of the empire began to collapse. The plague was particularly devastating for the Yuan dynasty, where the combination of internal conflict, economic instability, and disease led to the dynasty's eventual downfall. In addition to the Black Death, the Mongols faced increasing pressure from external forces. In China, the Ming dynasty rose to power and eventually overthrew the Yuan dynasty. In Russia, the Muscovite principality gradually expanded, pushing back the Golden Horde and ending Mongol rule in the region. The once mighty Mongol Empire, which had been held together by the military genius and vision of Genghis Khan, began to fragment into smaller, less powerful khanates, each fighting for dominance. The legacy of the Mongol Empire. The Mongol Empire may have declined, but its legacy is undeniable. The Mongols reshaped the world in ways that are still felt today. The Silk Road, which had been largely fragmented before Mongol rule, was revitalized, facilitating the exchange of goods, technologies, ideas, and cultures across Eurasia. The Mongol postal system, the introduction of gunpowder and paper, and the spread of religions like Islam and Buddhism were all enduring results of the Mongols' impact on world history. Even as the Mongol Empire disintegrated, the cultural exchange and political systems they established influenced the development of later empires and global trade networks. The Ming Dynasty in China, the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East, and the rise of Russia all benefited from the foundations laid by the Mongols, even as their physical empire crumbled. Though the Mongol Empire itself did not last, the vision of a unified world, interconnected by trade, culture, and ideas, lives on, influencing global interactions to this day. The Yuan dynasty in China, established by Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, was one of the most significant periods in Mongol history. While Genghis Khan's empire stretched across vast swaths of Eurasia, it was Kublai Khan who succeeded in achieving the Mongols' most ambitious conquest: the unification of all of China under Mongol rule. This achievement marked the first time that the whole of China was ruled by a non-Chinese dynasty, fundamentally reshaping the political, cultural, and social fabric of the region. Kublai Khan's ascent to power in China was not a straightforward conquest. Unlike the rapid, brutal campaigns of his grandfather, Kublai's challenge lay not just in defeating the Song dynasty, the ruling regime in southern China, but also in consolidating Mongol rule over a vastly different civilization. The Chinese had been long established in their own traditions, and the Mongols, despite their military superiority, faced a series of complex challenges in governing such a richly complex and advanced civilization. The conquest of China began in earnest after Genghis Khan's death, but it was under Kublai Khan's leadership that the Mongols began their final push to overthrow the Song dynasty in the mid-13th century. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused more on conquest and nomadic warfare, Kublai was a leader with a more visionary and strategic approach. He sought not only to rule China, but also to integrate Chinese administrative systems into Mongol governance. Kublai's decision to establish the Yuan dynasty in 1271, with Beijing as its capital, was a momentous step in the Mongol attempt to solidify their rule in China. He aimed to unite the Chinese people under his leadership, while at the same time maintaining the Mongols' nomadic traditions. Kublai's reign, though marked by military conquest, was equally characterized by his efforts to bridge the gap between Mongol traditions and the sophisticated culture of imperial China. The Mongol approach to governance and culture in China. Unlike his ancestors, Kublai Khan did not believe in ruling China as merely a conquered territory. Instead, he saw his role as emperor as one of integration and adaptation. Early in his reign, Kublai introduced Chinese-style governance alongside Mongol military systems. He retained elements of Chinese bureaucracy, established an efficient system of taxation, and even employed Chinese scholars to help run the government. This approach, however, created tension within the Mongol leadership. While Kublai embraced Chinese culture and Confucian ideals, some of his fellow Mongols saw this as a departure from their nomadic heritage and Mongol traditions. Nevertheless, Kublai was determined to create a lasting dynasty and believed that to rule China effectively, he had to learn from the very civilization he had conquered. Kublai's reign also marked a golden age for trade and cultural exchange in China. Under the Yuan dynasty, China became more integrated into the global trade network. The Silk Road flourished, and trade routes between China, Persia, and Europe were revitalized under Mongol control. The Pax Mongolica, which had brought peace and stability to Eurasia, allowed for the free flow of merchants, scholars, and artisans, further enriching the cultural fabric of China. But Kublai's vision was not without its difficulties. One of the most significant challenges he faced was the resistance of the Chinese elite and the Confucian bureaucracy, which was wary of Mongol rule. While Kublai sought to integrate Chinese systems of governance, he also created a separate Mongol aristocracy. This division between the Mongols and the Han Chinese population would have lasting consequences for the Yuan dynasty's stability. Economic and social challenges of the Yuan dynasty. Kublai Khan's reign saw the flourishing of the economy, with a marked increase in trade, agriculture, and craftsmanship. Under Mongol rule, China saw the introduction of paper money, which, while innovative, led to long-term economic instability. The overproduction of paper currency and rampant inflation caused serious economic problems, contributing to the eventual weakening of the Yuan dynasty. While the Yuan economy was built on the success of trade, agriculture and food production were also critical to its survival. Kublai's regime implemented policies to increase agricultural output, and the Mongols themselves participated in the construction of irrigation systems to improve crop yields. This was vital for maintaining the stability of the empire, especially in times of war and economic difficulty. However, the social structure of the Yuan dynasty was deeply stratified, with the Mongols occupying the highest social positions and the Han Chinese living as second-class citizens. Over time, the resentment of the Chinese population grew, and tensions began to mount between the ruling Mongols and the native Chinese population. This social divide, along with the rising economic difficulties, set the stage for the eventual collapse of the Yuan dynasty. The decline of the Yuan dynasty and the rise of the Ming dynasty. As Kublai Khan's successors struggled to maintain control over the Yuan dynasty, a series of natural disasters, famine, and peasant uprisings destabilized the empire. The plague, which had ravaged much of Eurasia, further weakened the Yuan dynasty, as did the growing resistance from the Chinese people. By the late 14th century, the Mongols had lost much of their grip on power, and in 1368, the Ming dynasty rose to power, marking the end of Mongol rule in China. Despite its eventual fall, the Yuan dynasty left a significant legacy in China. The Mongols had redefined the role of the emperor, established trade networks that spanned the globe, and brought cultural exchange to new heights. The Mongol impact on China persisted long after the fall of the Yuan dynasty, and elements of Mongol governance, including the use of paper money and the revitalization of the Silk Road, would influence Chinese administration for centuries. Legacy of Kublai Khan and the Mongol Empire in China. Kublai Khan's legacy in China is mixed. On the one hand, his vision and military prowess ensured the unification of China under Mongol rule, and his administrative innovations contributed to the development of a more centralized Chinese state. On the other hand, the social divisions and economic instability caused by the Mongols' policies left China with lasting challenges long after the Yuan dynasty fell. The Mongol influence on China, however, is undeniable. Kublai Khan's rule opened the country to global trade, encouraged the exchange of ideas and technologies, and introduced new governance practices that would eventually shape the future of Chinese dynasties. As we reflect on the rise and fall of the Yuan dynasty, one question remains: how did the legacy of the Mongol rule in China continue to shape the trajectory of the country's development, even after the fall of the Yuan? What aspects of Mongol governance and cultural exchange persisted in Ming China, and how did they influence China's future? The influence of the Mongols on Russia is a story of profound cultural, social, and political change. Known as the Tatar yoke or the Mongol yoke, the period during which the Mongols controlled the Rus principalities, the predecessor states to modern Russia, is one of the most significant and controversial chapters in Russian history. The Golden Horde, the Mongol Khanate that ruled over much of Russia for more than 2 centuries, shaped the future of the region in ways that would resonate long after Mongol rule had ended. The Mongols first invaded Russia in the early 13th century, under the leadership of Genghis Khan's successors, particularly Badu Khan, his grandson. In 1237, Badu Khan led the Mongol forces in a brutal campaign that crushed the Rus principalities, including the Kievan Rus, the heart of Eastern Slavic civilization. The Mongols swept through the region with their signature speed, strategy, and ruthlessness, laying waste to major cities like Kiev, Vladimir, and Ryazan. By 1240, the Mongols had established control over most of Russia. The Mongol rule over Russia was not direct military occupation, as it had been in some other regions, but instead a system of tribute and vassalage. The Rus princes were allowed to remain in power, but they were required to pay tribute to the Mongols in exchange for their autonomy. The Golden Horde, based in the western part of the empire, mainly in the steppes of modern-day Kazakhstan and southern Russia, controlled the land, collecting taxes and ensuring that no major uprisings against Mongol authority would succeed. At the heart of Mongol rule in Russia was the tribute system. The Mongols extracted vast sums from the Rus principalities, and the wealth generated by these taxes allowed the Mongols to fund their own military and political ambitions. The Khan of the Golden Horde acted as the supreme ruler of the region, with the Rus princes serving as intermediaries, overseeing local administration while paying homage and tribute to the Mongol overlords. Despite the Mongol domination, the Russian Orthodox Church played an important role in maintaining stability within the principalities. The Church was allowed to thrive under Mongol rule, and its religious authority helped legitimize Mongol power among the common people. The Church's position as a mediator between the people and the Mongols gave it significant influence in Russian society, ensuring its survival and even allowing it to grow during this turbulent period. The Golden Horde ruled over Russia for roughly 2 centuries, and during this time, the Mongol influence profoundly shaped the political and military structure of the region. However, their hold on Russia was not absolute, and the Mongols' indirect rule eventually began to fracture as Russian states grew stronger and more unified. The rise of Moscow and its eventual overthrow of Mongol power would change the course of Russian history forever. The impact of Mongol rule on Russian society. While the Mongols did not directly impose their culture on the Rus peoples, their influence was still deeply felt. Over time, the Mongols impacted Russian governance, military tactics, and even society in ways that shaped the future development of the Russian state. Military and administrative influence. The Mongol military system had a lasting impact on Russian warfare. The Mongols' tactics, especially their ability to move quickly and strike with overwhelming force, influenced Russian armies. The Mongols were known for their cavalry, archery, and hit-and-run tactics, and these strategies were absorbed by Russian forces over time. Mongol innovations such as mounted archery, siege warfare, and military organization would become part of Russian military doctrine in the centuries that followed. The Mongols also introduced centralized administrative practices to Russia, particularly in terms of taxation and bureaucratic governance. Although Russia had long been governed by feudal systems, the Mongols instilled a sense of centralized control. The Russian princes were expected to report to the Mongol Khan and collect taxes for the horde, and this system of centralized oversight remained in Russian politics after the fall of Mongol power. Cultural and social effects. The Mongols' reign also had cultural effects, although they were more indirect. The Mongol yoke was marked by cultural isolation from the rest of Europe, particularly after the Mongols cut off Russia's direct ties to Western Europe. While the rest of Europe underwent significant renaissance and cultural revival, Russia remained relatively isolated under Mongol rule. In the long term, the Mongols' impact on Russian society helped shape the cultural identity of Russia, including the development of a distinct Russian Orthodox Christian identity that resisted Westernization. The Mongols, despite their foreignness, provided a unique political and social structure that allowed Russia to stabilize during a time of frequent internal conflict. The Mongols' influence also shaped Russian views on military power and leadership. The Russian leadership that emerged after the Mongol era adopted a more autocratic style, and the idea of a strong ruler became central to the Russian identity, particularly under the Tsars. The Mongol era had introduced the notion that a strong centralized authority was essential for maintaining control over vast territories. The decline of Mongol power and the rise of Moscow. By the late 14th century, the Golden Horde began to weaken. Internal strife, economic decline, and the rise of other powers, including the Ming dynasty in China, contributed to the Horde's fragmentation. Meanwhile, in the Muscovite Principality, a new power was emerging. Moscow, which had initially been a minor principality under Mongol control, began to rise to prominence, particularly under the leadership of Ivan the Great. Ivan III, who became Grand Prince of Moscow in 1462, played a key role in asserting Russian independence from the Mongols. In 1480, Ivan III famously refused to pay tribute to the Mongol Khan in an event known as the Great Stand on the Ugra River. This marked the end of Mongol dominance over Russia, and the Muscovite state began to emerge as a powerful force in Eastern Europe. Moscow would eventually become the nucleus of the Russian Empire and would take its place as a dominant power in the region. Legacy of the Mongols in Russian identity. While Mongol rule over Russia lasted for more than 2 centuries, its eventual end set the stage for the emergence of a new Russian identity. The influence of the Mongol yoke, though it did not result in permanent Mongol domination of Russian culture, left a deep imprint on Russian governance, military strategy, and society. The legacy of Mongol rule is complex and controversial in Russian history. On the one hand, the Mongols helped shape the centralized power that would define Russia for centuries. On the other hand, the Mongol era is seen as a period of humiliation and domination for the Russian people. It also contributed to the cultural isolation of Russia from the broader European Renaissance, but it also fostered a sense of Russian uniqueness. Even today, the memory of the Mongol yoke continues to influence the way Russians view their history, their relationships with the East, and their legacy as a power that emerged from under Mongol domination to become one of the great empires of the modern world. The Mongol Empire's expansion into Eastern Europe was one of the most dramatic and impactful events in the region's history. Unlike the nomadic incursions that had taken place before, the Mongol invasions of the 13th century were marked by their speed, ferocity, and far-reaching consequences. Under the leadership of Badu Khan, the Mongol armies advanced through Eastern Europe, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake, but their influence went far beyond mere conquest. In 1236, Badu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, led the Mongol invasion into Eastern Europe. The Mongols' military tactics, honed on the vast steppes of Mongolia, were a far cry from the conventional warfare scene in Europe at the time. The Mongols, famed for their lightning-fast cavalry and surprise attacks, struck with such speed and efficiency that they overwhelmed the local defenses. The Kievan Rus, a collection of East Slavic principalities, was among the first to feel the brunt of the Mongol assault. By 1240, the Mongols had successfully sacked Kiev, the heart of the Kievan Rus, and forced the principalities to submit to Mongol rule. The Mongols, under the banner of the Golden Horde, established their dominance in Eastern Europe, demanding tribute and imposing their will over the various Slavic states. But the Mongol invasions didn't stop there. Badu Khan's forces continued to advance westward, reaching as far as Hungary and Poland. In 1241, the Mongols decisively defeated the Polish and Hungarian armies in a series of battles, including the Battle of Mohyl in Hungary. The Mongol cavalry, with its unmatched ability to strike fast and hard, left Europe stunned by their power. However, the Mongols did not push any further into Europe. After the death of Ojdai Khan in 1241, the Mongol leadership recalled Badu Khan's forces, and the invasion halted. Despite the sudden withdrawal, the Mongols had already left an indelible mark on the region. The Eastern European states, particularly in Russia, were now subjects of the Golden Horde, marking the beginning of what would be a long and complex relationship between the Mongols and the peoples of Eastern Europe. The Mongols and the Golden Horde rule through tribute and control. After the initial invasions, the Golden Horde, which became the Mongol Khanate that controlled much of Russia and parts of Eastern Europe, solidified its rule through a system of tribute and vassalage. The Mongols did not maintain permanent garrisons in every region they controlled. Instead, they relied on local rulers to govern in exchange for tribute. This system allowed the Mongols to maintain a light footprint in the region, avoiding the need for constant military presence, but ensuring that their power was maintained. The Rus princes, although allowed to remain in power, were required to pay tribute to the Golden Horde and recognize the authority of the Mongol Khan. These tribute payments were significant and strained the local economies. However, the Mongols also allowed for relative autonomy within the regions, which allowed the local rulers to maintain control over day-to-day governance. The Golden Horde's rule also extended into Eastern Europe, influencing the regions of Poland, Hungary, and the Balkans. The Mongols used a mix of military pressure, diplomacy, and economic control to maintain their influence. While many areas were not directly occupied by Mongol forces, the tribute system kept the Eastern European states under Mongol control for several centuries. The long-term effects of Mongol rule on Eastern Europe. The Mongol presence in Eastern Europe profoundly influenced the region in various ways, both immediately and in the long term. The most significant impact was the political and social structure that emerged during Mongol rule. Political centralization and autonomy. The Mongol yoke, as the rule of the Golden Horde became known, had a paradoxical effect on the political development of Eastern Europe. On the one hand, the Mongols imposed a centralized system of tribute collection and overlordship that gave power to the Mongol Khan in the steppe. This centralized authority contrasted with the relatively decentralized nature of the Russian and Eastern European principalities before Mongol rule. On the other hand, the Mongols did not interfere too much in local politics, allowing the Russian princes and other regional rulers to retain power as long as they adhered to Mongol authority. However, the heavy tribute burden and political fragmentation caused by Mongol rule would contribute to internal instability in the long run. In Russia, the Grand Duchy of Moscow emerged as the strongest force against Mongol domination. The Muscovite princes were able to leverage their position as tax collectors for the Mongols to strengthen their own power. This process eventually led to the liberation of Russia from Mongol rule under Ivan III in the late 15th century. Military tactics and cultural legacy. In terms of military influence, the Mongol invasions left a significant mark on the Eastern European way of war. The speed, mobility, and mounted archery tactics of the Mongols were incorporated into Russian and Polish military strategies. Additionally, siege warfare techniques that the Mongols had used in their campaigns were also adopted by local armies in Eastern Europe. Culturally, Mongol rule in Russia resulted in a fusion of Mongol and Slavic traditions, although the Mongols were relatively respectful of local customs and religion. The Mongols' approach to governance allowed Orthodox Christianity to remain the dominant faith in Russia, and the Russian Church gained significant influence, especially in the absence of direct Mongol control over religious practices. In fact, the Church's ability to collect taxes and maintain its authority often made it a key intermediary between the Mongols and the local populations. In terms of architecture, the Mongols influenced the development of Russian fortifications. Mongol-style fortresses and cities were built in Russia during the period of Mongol rule, although these elements eventually blended into traditional Russian architectural styles. The fall of the Golden Horde and the end of Mongol rule in Eastern Europe. The decline of the Golden Horde began in the 14th century, with internal strife, weakening leadership, and the emergence of stronger Russian states like Moscow. The Horde was also significantly weakened by the plague and its own internal conflicts, including a series of succession crises and uprisings. By the late 15th century, the power of the Mongols in Eastern Europe had significantly waned. In 1480, the Grand Duchy of Moscow, under Ivan III, refused to pay tribute to the Golden Horde, effectively ending Mongol dominance in the region. By the early 16th century, the Golden Horde had splintered, with various successor states such as the Crimean Khanate and Kazan Khanate fighting among themselves and becoming absorbed into neighboring empires. While Russia eventually freed itself from Mongol rule, the legacy of the Mongol Empire persisted. The centralized power and taxation systems established by the Mongols would influence the later development of the Russian state, and the cultural and military exchanges that took place during the period of Mongol domination had a lasting impact on Eastern European society and politics. Legacy of Mongol rule in Eastern Europe. The Mongols' influence on Eastern Europe left an indelible mark on the political landscape of the region. The Mongol yoke, while often viewed negatively in the region, brought a level of political unity, military structure, and cultural exchange that was unprecedented at the time. Despite the eventual fall of Mongol rule, their imprint on the Russian and Eastern European landscape would shape the course of history for centuries to come. The Mongols' use of tribute systems, their role in the spread of military tactics, and their contributions to administrative practices influenced the political structures that followed. Their introduction of trade routes, cultural exchanges, and new technologies helped open Eastern Europe to the larger world. The relationship between the Mongols and the Islamic world is one of the most complex and transformative chapters in history. It was marked by conquest, conflict, and ultimately cultural exchange. When Genghis Khan and his descendants began their conquests in the early 13th century, the Islamic world, which at the time consisted of powerful empires such as the Seljuk Turks, the Khwarezmian Empire, and the Abbasid Caliphate, was at a crossroads. The Mongol invasions would forever change the course of Islamic history, with both catastrophic destruction and lasting contributions to the Islamic cultural and scientific renaissance. The first major Mongol incursion into the Islamic world began in 1219, when Genghis Khan launched a series of attacks against the Khwarezmian Empire, a vast and wealthy state located in what is now modern-day Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. The Khwarezmian Sultan, Ala ad-Din Muhammad, provoked Genghis Khan by executing a Mongol trade envoy, which led to one of the most devastating military campaigns in Mongol history. In response, Genghis Khan sent an enormous force that decimated the Khwarezmian Empire. The Mongols' military strategy, characterized by speed, shock tactics, and psychological warfare, overwhelmed the Khwarezmian cities. Major cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Merv fell to the Mongols, with their populations either massacred or scattered. The destruction of Merv, once a bustling center of Islamic culture, became a symbol of the devastation the Mongols wrought across the region. The sheer scale of Mongol destruction left a lasting scar on the Islamic world. Many of the great cities of the Islamic Golden Age, which had been centers of science, philosophy, and trade, were reduced to rubble. The Mongols' ability to conquer quickly and thoroughly was a testament to their military genius, but it also instilled fear and resentment in the Islamic world. However, despite this early brutality, the Mongols' relationship with the Islamic world would evolve, and Islamic influence would shape the Mongol Empire for generations to come. The Ilkhanate, Mongol rule, and the Islamic Renaissance. After the initial destruction, the Mongols in the Islamic world, especially in the Persian regions, began to embrace many aspects of Islamic culture. Hulagu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, led the Mongols into Persia in 1256, ultimately establishing the Ilkhanate, a Mongol Khanate that ruled over much of modern-day Iran, Iraq, and Caucasus. Hulagu Khan and his successors initially remained true to their nomadic Mongol traditions, but over time, they began to integrate Islamic culture, particularly Persian and Shia Islam, into their rule. Hulagu's son, Abaka Khan, was the first Ilkhan to adopt Islam openly, and his conversion helped cement the bond between the Ilkhanate and the Muslim world. This embrace of Islam marked a dramatic shift from the early days of conquest, when the Mongols had been seen as foreign invaders and religious outsiders. Under the Ilkhans, the Persian city of Tabriz became a major cultural and intellectual center, drawing scholars, artists, and scientists from across the Islamic world. This was a period of great cultural synthesis, where Mongol and Islamic traditions intertwined, resulting in the flourishing of Persian literature, architecture, and science. The Ilkhanate was instrumental in facilitating trade between the Islamic world and the Mongol Empire, particularly through the Silk Road. This was a period of unprecedented cultural exchange, where Mongol rulers encouraged the translation of scientific texts, the movement of artisans, and the spread of knowledge between the East and the West. This exchange contributed to a resurgence of Islamic scholarship and the development of new intellectual traditions in the region. The fall of the Ilkhanate and the end of Mongol rule in the Islamic world. Despite the cultural achievements of the Ilkhanate, the Mongols eventually faced difficulties that led to the Khanate's decline. The Ilkhanate struggled with succession crises, and after the death of Ghazan Khan in 1304, internal strife and weakening central authority began to destabilize the empire. By the mid-14th century, the Ilkhanate was in a state of collapse, further exacerbated by the Black Death and famine. The Ilkhanate's collapse left a power vacuum in the region, and by the early 15th century, Persia had fragmented into smaller states. The Timurid Empire, founded by Tamerlane, a descendant of Genghis Khan, eventually took control of much of the region, marking the end of direct Mongol rule over Persia and much of the Islamic world. Despite the eventual downfall of the Ilkhanate, the Mongol rulers' integration into the Islamic world had a lasting impact. Islamic Mongol rulers left behind a rich cultural legacy that would influence the development of Persian, Turkish, and even Central Asian states in the centuries to come. The Mongol legacy in the Islamic world: culture, science, and religion. The Mongol presence in the Islamic world did not end with the collapse of the Ilkhanate. In fact, the Mongol period in the Islamic world left an indelible mark on Islamic civilization, particularly in terms of cultural and intellectual exchange. The Mongols were instrumental in spreading Islamic knowledge to other regions, particularly in China and Central Asia. The integration of Islamic scholars into the Mongol court and the translation of Arabic scientific texts into Mongolian played a crucial role in preserving and transmitting knowledge during a time of turmoil. The Mongol rulers also played a role in promoting religious tolerance, allowing the spread of Islam, as well as other faiths, including Christianity and Buddhism, across their vast empire. Moreover, the architecture of the Mongol-ruled regions, particularly in Persia, became a beautiful fusion of Persian and Mongol styles. The Ilkhans commissioned large-scale building projects, including mosques, palaces, and caravanserais, which blended Islamic and Mongol elements. These architectural achievements would influence future Muslim dynasties and leave a lasting legacy in Islamic art and culture. Mongol rule in the Islamic world also contributed to the globalization of the Silk Road, which facilitated the exchange of not only goods but also knowledge, including advancements in medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and literature. The Mongols and the spread of Islam. Despite the brutal beginnings of Mongol rule in the Islamic world, the eventual embrace of Islam by the Mongol rulers helped to integrate the Mongols into the Islamic world. Over time, the Mongols went from being feared invaders to respected rulers who contributed to the growth and flourishing of Islamic civilization. They helped shape the intellectual and cultural development of the Islamic world, even if their conquest began with destruction. In the centuries following the fall of the Ilkhanate, the Mongol legacy continued to resonate in the Islamic world. The Timurid Empire, led by Tamerlane, and the Mughal Empire in India were both influenced by Mongol traditions, demonstrating how the Mongol interaction with Islam had long-lasting effects. The Mongol contribution to the Islamic world remains one of the most fascinating examples of cultural exchange and assimilation in world history. The Islamic Golden Age, which had flourished before the Mongol invasions, was reinvigorated through the interactions between the Mongols and Muslim scholars. When Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, ascended to the throne in 1260, he was faced with a monumental task conquering and governing China, a land with a rich and ancient civilization that was vastly different from the Mongol steppe culture. Kublai's rise to power marked the beginning of the Yuan dynasty in China, a landmark moment in world history. This was the first time in history that China was ruled by a non-Chinese dynasty, and Kublai Khan's rule would have far-reaching impacts on both China and the Mongol Empire. Kublai Khan's approach to governance was shaped by a vision of unification, but it was also one of adaptation. While Genghis Khan had been focused on military conquest, Kublai had a more nuanced understanding of the importance of cultural integration and the necessity of maintaining China's traditions. After a long and arduous campaign to conquer the Song dynasty in southern China, Kublai established himself as the first Mongol emperor of China, founding the Yuan dynasty in 1271. Unlike his predecessors, Kublai recognized the need to embrace Chinese customs and administrative practices in order to rule effectively. His decision to adopt Chinese-style governance, including elements of Confucianism and bureaucratic institutions, was a marked departure from the Mongol tradition of nomadic rule. In doing so, Kublai sought to merge the Mongol and Chinese worlds in a way that would benefit both. Kublai's vision for China was not just about conquering it, but about incorporating it into the Mongol Empire as a new and prosperous part. He worked to improve the infrastructure of China, promoting the construction of roads, canals, and a reliable postal system. By doing so, Kublai was also able to foster trade and communication between China and other parts of the empire, including Central Asia and Europe. One of Kublai's most enduring legacies was his support for trade, which helped to establish the Yuan dynasty as a key hub in the Silk Road network. Under his reign, China became a central point in the global trade system, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures between the East and the West. The Pax Mongolica, which had been established under Genghis Khan, continued under Kublai's rule, ensuring the safety and stability of the Silk Road. However, Kublai's efforts to integrate Mongol rule with Chinese culture were not without challenges. The Mongols were still seen as foreign rulers by many in China, especially by the native Chinese population who viewed Mongol dominance with resentment. Kublai had to deal with the delicate balance between maintaining Mongol traditions and acknowledging the depth of Chinese cultural heritage. Despite these tensions, Kublai's reign ushered in a period of economic prosperity for China. The introduction of paper money, along with improvements to the trade networks, helped stimulate the economy, which saw a remarkable boom under the Yuan dynasty. Kublai's governance brought about agricultural advancements, urbanization, and the growth of merchant communities, which helped establish China as a commercial powerhouse during the 14th century. The cultural exchange between the Mongols and China. One of the most remarkable aspects of Kublai Khan's rule was his encouragement of cultural exchange. As a Mongol ruler, he had an innate respect for the nomadic traditions that shaped his people, but he also recognized the importance of integrating the sophisticated traditions of China. Under his reign, Chinese art, philosophy, literature, and science continued to thrive, and this created a cultural synthesis that would influence Chinese culture for centuries to come. One of the best-known cultural exchanges during Kublai's reign was the arrival of Marco Polo, the Venetian explorer. Marco Polo's detailed accounts of life in the Mongol Empire, particularly his experiences at Kublai Khan's court, opened the eyes of Europe to the wealth, grandeur, and complexity of the Mongol world. Polo's observations about the Mongol postal system, the use of paper money, and the opulence of the Yuan capital, Khanbalik, modern-day Beijing, highlighted the unique blend of Mongol and Chinese influences under Kublai's rule. Kublai's court became a cosmopolitan center, welcoming scholars, artists, and merchants from across the Mongol Empire and beyond. The cross-pollination of ideas, including the spread of Islamic scholarship, Persian art, and Central Asian technologies, flourished in Yuan China. This multicultural environment promoted the exchange of scientific knowledge, including advances in astronomy, medicine, and engineering, which were subsequently absorbed into Chinese and Mongol culture. Additionally, Kublai's reign saw the integration of Mongol military traditions with Chinese strategies. The Mongols, known for their cavalry prowess, adapted their nomadic military techniques to Chinese warfare, influencing the military and defensive practices of the Yuan dynasty. However, despite these cultural adaptations, Kublai's efforts to bring the Mongol and Chinese worlds together were often met with resistance. Many Chinese intellectuals and Confucian officials resented the Mongols' foreign rule and their attempts to integrate the two cultures. The Mongols' policy of keeping the Mongol nobility separate from the native Chinese elites created lasting tensions that would simmer beneath the surface of the Yuan dynasty. The decline of the Yuan dynasty and the end of Mongol rule in China. Despite Kublai Khan's remarkable achievements, the Yuan dynasty began to decline after his death in 1294. The empire he had built was vast, but the internal challenges it faced were immense. The Mongols' nomadic traditions and centralized governance were difficult to reconcile with the needs of a vast, urbanized, and highly populated empire like China. After Kublai's death, the Mongol rulers of China became increasingly disconnected from the needs of their Chinese subjects, leading to widespread rebellions and instability. In the 14th century, economic hardship, famine, and corruption within the Yuan administration further weakened the dynasty. The Mongols' inability to adapt to Chinese agricultural needs and their over-reliance on military might alienate the Chinese population. The Red Turban Rebellion, a large-scale uprising by Chinese peasants, marked the beginning of the end for the Yuan dynasty. By 1368, the Ming dynasty had risen to power, overthrowing the Mongols and ending Mongol rule in China. While the Yuan dynasty fell, the Mongols left a lasting legacy in China. The Yuan dynasty's policies on trade, taxation, and military organization influenced later Chinese empires. The Ming dynasty, although distinct in many ways, inherited much of the Mongol system of governance, particularly in terms of centralized rule and bureaucratic control. Kublai Khan's integration of Mongol and Chinese cultures also left a deep mark on Chinese art, architecture, and philosophy. The Mongol Empire under Kublai had facilitated a cross-cultural dialogue that continued to shape the development of Chinese civilization long after the Yuan dynasty's collapse. Legacy of the Yuan dynasty and Kublai Khan. The legacy of the Yuan dynasty is complex, as it represents both the peak of Mongol ambition and the limits of Mongol rule over a highly sophisticated and ancient civilization. Kublai Khan's reign marked the first time that China was unified under foreign rule, and his vision of a global Mongol empire that brought together East and West remains a powerful symbol of cultural exchange and integration. Despite the ultimate fall of the Yuan dynasty, Kublai Khan's legacy in China remains deeply embedded in the nation's history, not only as a period of conquest and war, but also as a moment when China became a vital link in a larger world connected by trade, ideas, and exchange in ways that would lay the groundwork for future global interactions. The Mongol Empire profoundly shaped the fate of Central Asia, a vast region that served as both the strategic center and cultural crossroads of the empire. Stretching from the Tian Shan Mountains to the Caspian Sea, Central Asia was home to a complex mix of nomadic and settled cultures, religions, and languages. For the Mongols, It was a land of great importance, a place where they could connect their homeland in the steppe with the far-flung territories they had conquered, including China, Persia, and Eastern Europe. Genghis Khan, in particular, recognized the strategic importance of Central Asia as a hub for trade, culture, and military campaigns. The Mongols first entered the region in the early 13th century, defeating the Khwarezmian Empire and capturing its territories, which included large parts of modern-day Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan. The destruction of Samarkand and Bukhara, two of the most renowned cities in the Islamic world, marked the Mongols' arrival in Central Asia. These cities, once prosperous centers of Islamic scholarship, trade, and art, were overwhelmed by the Mongol forces, yet they also became pivotal in the Mongol conquest and subsequent rule of the region. As the Mongols expanded across Central Asia, they established a network of trade routes, helped by their mastery of mounted warfare and their efficient communication systems. This region became a key component of the Silk Road, the ancient trade route that stretched across Asia to Europe, facilitating the exchange of goods, cultures, and ideas. Central Asia was the heart of the Silk Road, and the Mongols, with their expertise in logistics and governance, ensured that it remained a flourishing center for trade and cultural exchange. One of the greatest legacies of Mongol rule in Central Asia was the way it transformed the region into a global crossroads. Persian, Arabic, Turkish, and Mongolian cultures blended together, creating a rich cultural exchange that shaped the region's future. The arts, literature, and science thrived under Mongol rule, as scholars, craftsmen, and merchants from across the empire moved freely within the region. Central Asia became not only a trade route, but also a center for knowledge and cultural synthesis. The Ilkhanate and the Khanate of Chagatai, Mongol power in Central Asia. After the death of Genghis Khan in 1227, the Mongol Empire was divided into several khanates, and Central Asia was largely governed by two major Mongol territories, the Ilkhanate and the Khanate of Chagatai. These regions, each ruled by a different descendant of Genghis Khan, became vital to the stability and legacy of Mongol rule in the region. The Ilkhanate, with its capital in Tabriz, modern-day Iran, governed much of the western part of Central Asia, including Persia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. The Ilkhans were instrumental in maintaining Mongol rule over these areas while also adopting Islamic traditions and fostering economic growth. The region became a vital hub for trade between the East and the West, and the Ilkhanate became known for its impressive contributions to Islamic art, architecture, and scholarship. In contrast, the Khanate of Chagatai, named after Chagatai, the second son of Genghis Khan, ruled over the eastern portion of Central Asia, stretching from the Tian Shan Mountains to Persia and India. The Chagatai Khanate was more diverse in terms of its religious makeup, including a mix of Islam, Buddhism, and shamanism. Despite the political fragmentation that eventually plagued the Chagatai Khanate, the region remained a critical part of the Mongol Empire and continued to play a central role in the Silk Road trade. Under the Mongols, Central Asia became a melting pot of cultures, as the nomadic Mongol traditions intermingled with the Persian and Turkic cultures, as well as the Islamic intellectual heritage. This fusion of cultures contributed to the development of Central Asian cities as centers of learning, commerce, and religious exchange. The rise of Timurid Empire and the legacy of the Mongols in Central Asia. Following the fall of the Ilkhanate and the Chagatai Khanate, Central Asia entered a period of relative instability. However, the legacy of Mongol rule remained deeply ingrained in the region's political, cultural, and economic systems. Tamerlane, known in the West as Timur, a Turco-Mongol leader who claimed descent from Genghis Khan, rose to power in the late 14th century and established the Timurid Empire in Central Asia. Tamerlane's empire was largely based in Samarkand, which he transformed into a dazzling capital, rich with Islamic architecture, art, and science. His rule marked a revival of many of the Mongol traditions, but he also embraced Persian and Islamic elements in his government and culture. Tamerlane's contributions to science, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy became key to the Renaissance in Central Asia and the broader Islamic world. While Tamerlane's empire eventually fragmented after his death, his influence on the region was lasting. The Timurid Renaissance, which combined Mongol, Persian, and Islamic traditions, left a legacy in Central Asia that would later be inherited by other regional powers, including the Mughals in India. The Mughal Empire, founded by Babur in 1526, claimed direct descent from Tamerlane and the Mongol Empire, continuing the Mongol legacy in the subcontinent. The decline of Mongol influence in Central Asia and the rise of new powers. By the 16th century, the influence of the Mongols in Central Asia began to wane. The rise of new powers, such as the Safavids in Persia, the Ottomans in the West, and the Mughals in India, gradually overshadowed Mongol political control in the region. Timurid rule eventually gave way to new dynasties, and the Mongol Khanates in Central Asia were replaced by rival powers. Nevertheless, the legacy of the Mongols in Central Asia remained strong. The Mongol cultural synthesis of nomadic traditions, Persian influence, and Islamic scholarship continued to influence the region's development long after Mongol power had faded. The Silk Road also remained a vital trade route, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies between East and West. In the centuries following the decline of the Mongol Empire, the cultural, political, and economic systems established by the Mongols continued to shape the history of Central Asia. The region's role as a global crossroads for trade, culture, and scientific exchange was solidified during the Mongol era and would continue to influence the development of the modern world. When the Mongols took control of vast stretches of Eurasia, they didn't just bring about a change in the political landscape, they transformed the very nature of global trade. The Silk Road, which had once been a network of fragmented routes for merchants and caravans, was revitalized and expanded under Mongol rule. Genghis Khan and his descendants understood the importance of trade and the flow of goods, ideas, and technologies across their vast empire. They did not merely conquer lands, they sought to unite them, creating a unified economic space that stretched from China to Eastern Europe. Before the Mongols, the Silk Road had been subject to disruptions from local warfare, plagues, and political instability. Cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, once thriving trade hubs, had been reduced to ruins or weakened by internal conflict. The Mongols, with their ability to conquer rapidly, also brought a unique system of governance and organization that allowed trade to flourish. Under Genghis Khan's leadership, and later Kublai Khan, the Mongol Empire created a Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace, that ensured safety for merchants, travelers, and diplomats. The Silk Road became a single entity once more, its various routes originally controlled by different empires now unified under the Mongol banner. This created a sense of security that encouraged long-distance trade and facilitated the movement of not just goods, but also ideas, religions, and technologies. For the first time in centuries, merchants from China, India, the Middle East, and Europe were able to travel along the same routes without the fear of raiders or political instability. The Mongol postal system, with its relay stations and mounted couriers, ensured that communication across the empire was swift and reliable, further promoting economic integration. The Mongols themselves established trade policies that encouraged the flow of silk, spices, precious metals, paper, and gunpowder across continents. Trade goods and cultural exchange on the Silk Road. The Silk Road was a major conduit for the exchange of goods, and under Mongol rule, the flow of goods across the empire expanded significantly. One of the most famous exports along the Silk Road was, of course, silk. China, the origin of this precious fabric, became a major supplier to the rest of the world, and the Mongols ensured that the trade routes remained open and protected, allowing the silk trade to flourish. Other luxury goods also flowed along the Silk Road, including spices, precious stones, textiles, tea and ceramics from China, jewels and ivory from India, and gold, silver and furs from Europe. The Mongol-controlled cities like Samarkand, Karakoram, and Beijing became bustling marketplaces where merchants from all corners of the empire converged, exchanging wares and ideas. But the Mongol Empire's greatest contribution to the Silk Road was not just the movement of material goods, it was the exchange of cultural and intellectual wealth. The Mongol Empire was a melting pot of cultures, and this period of intense interaction between East and West allowed for the movement of knowledge and innovation that shaped the future of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Science, mathematics, and astronomy were some of the primary fields of intellectual exchange. Arabic, Persian, and Chinese scholars often worked together, translating texts and sharing discoveries. The Mongol rulers were patrons of knowledge, particularly Kublai Khan, who welcomed missionaries, scholars, and artists into his court. These intellectual exchanges would later influence the Renaissance in Europe, as Islamic and Chinese knowledge found its way into Western academia. The spread of religions was also a significant feature of the Mongol-controlled Silk Road. Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and Nestorian Christianity all spread across Eurasia, as Mongol rule provided a safe haven for missionaries and pilgrims. Kublai Khan, for instance, welcomed Buddhist monks to his court, and the Mongols themselves were often religiously tolerant, allowing the free practice of multiple faiths within their empire. The Mongols and the spread of technologies. One of the more lasting legacies of the Mongol Empire was the spread of technologies that had far-reaching consequences for the future of civilization. Among the most important technologies that moved along the Silk Road were paper and gunpowder. Paper had been invented in China and was a closely guarded secret for centuries. But under Mongol rule, paper-making technology spread westward, reaching the Middle East and eventually Europe. This was a crucial development for the spread of knowledge and literacy, and it contributed to the development of the printing press in Europe centuries later. Gunpowder, another Chinese invention, spread to the Islamic world and Europe during the Mongol period. The Mongols, with their advanced military strategies, had utilized gunpowder weapons in their conquests, and the technology eventually reached Europe, revolutionizing warfare and playing a key role in the development of modern weaponry. The decline of the Mongol Empire and the end of the Silk Road's golden age. While the Mongol Empire fostered an era of unprecedented trade, cultural exchange, and intellectual growth, the empire's decline had a significant impact on the Silk Road. After the death of Kublai Khan in 1294, the empire fragmented into various khanates. These khanates often fought amongst themselves, weakening the unity that had once kept the Silk Road secure. The rise of new powerful empires such as the Ottoman Empire, the Ming dynasty in China, and the Safavid Empire in Persia further disrupted the flow of goods along the Silk Road. These empires were less interested in maintaining the global trade network that the Mongols had fostered, and over time, the Silk Road began to decline, particularly with the advent of maritime trade routes in the 15th century. Additionally, the Black Death, which ravaged Europe and Asia in the mid-14th century, severely disrupted the flow of people and goods along the Silk Road. As cities were decimated and populations declined, the once thriving trade routes became dangerous and economically unviable. The legacy of the Mongol Empire's role in global trade. Despite the decline of the Silk Road, the Mongol Empire's legacy in global trade continued to shape the course of history. The Mongols' creation of a unified trading space allowed the exchange of goods, knowledge, and technologies in ways that had never been possible before. They effectively laid the groundwork for globalization in the medieval world, setting the stage for the later developments of the Age of Exploration. The Mongol Empire fostered an environment where the East and West could exchange ideas and technologies, a process that not only changed the Mongol world, but also had a profound influence on the rest of the world. Their patronage of intellectuals and artists, their encouragement of scientific and technological exchange, and their creation of a global economic system were all key contributions to the development of the modern world. Today, the Mongols' impact on global trade remains evident in the interconnected world of the 21st century, a world that continues to rely on the ideas and innovations that were first exchanged across the Silk Road under Mongol rule. The Mongols are perhaps best known in history for their military prowess, which allowed them to conquer one of the largest empires in the world in just a few decades. What made the Mongol military so successful was not just its strength in numbers, but rather its strategic ingenuity, adaptability, and use of psychological warfare. The Mongol army, under the leadership of Genghis Khan, revolutionized the art of war in ways that still resonate in modern military doctrine. At the core of Mongol military success was their ability to harness the power of mobility. The Mongols were nomads, accustomed to moving swiftly across vast distances on horseback. This was not just a matter of convenience. It was a strategic advantage that allowed them to outmaneuver and outpace their enemies, striking quickly and unexpectedly. Unlike the infantry-based armies of medieval Europe or China, the Mongols relied almost entirely on cavalry, particularly light cavalry, which allowed them to conduct hit-and-run tactics with ease. The Mongol military system was incredibly organized and disciplined. It was divided into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, each commanded by an officer. This decimal system allowed for fluid communication, quick redeployment, and a level of coordination that was unmatched by many contemporary armies. This organization enabled the Mongols to field large armies quickly, move them across vast distances, and execute coordinated strikes that overwhelmed their enemies. But the success of the Mongol army wasn't just about their ability to fight, it was also about their ability to outthink their enemies. The Mongols were masters of strategy, able to read the terrain, understand their enemies' weaknesses, and use both deception and psychological tactics to gain the upper hand. The key tactics of the Mongol army. Several key tactics made the Mongol army nearly unstoppable. Some of the most notable include 1. Speed and mobility. One of the Mongols' greatest strengths was their ability to move quickly across vast distances. Mounted archers on fast horses could cover incredible distances in short amounts of time, often covering 40 to 50 miles a day, much faster than any infantry. This mobility allowed the Mongols to conduct rapid raids and surprise attacks, which often left their enemies disoriented and unprepared. Additionally, the Mongols' use of lightweight armor and efficient logistical systems meant they could move at incredible speeds while still being effective in battle. Their horses, small and sturdy, were able to endure long distances, while the Mongol warriors were skilled in maintaining their cavalry's readiness for rapid deployment at a moment's notice. 2. Psychological warfare. Perhaps one of the most unique and effective tactics used by the Mongols was their ability to manipulate the psychology of their enemies. Mongol armies often employed the tactic of feigned retreat, where a small portion of their forces would appear to flee in disorder, luring the enemy into a trap. Once the enemy was in pursuit, the Mongols would suddenly turn around and strike with overwhelming force. Mongols also used fear to great effect, deliberately spreading rumors of their brutality. Before attacking a city or army, they would often send scouts ahead to sow terror by burning villages, executing civilians, and engaging in acts of cruelty, sending a clear message: surrender or face annihilation. This terror often led to cities and armies surrendering without a fight, knowing that resistance would result in catastrophic losses. Additionally, the Mongols understood the importance of intelligence. They often had spies and scouts embedded in enemy camps, providing detailed information about enemy movements, strengths, and weaknesses. This intelligence network allowed the Mongols to plan their campaigns with precision, often attacking where they were least expected. 3. Siege warfare. While the Mongols were known for their speed and cavalry, they were also adept at siege warfare. The Mongols borrowed many tactics from the Chinese and Persians, incorporating the use of siege engines such as catapults, battering rams, and trebuchets. The Mongols also used psychological warfare in their sieges. They would often surround a city for weeks or even months, launching arrows and causing constant fear and tension within the walls. The Mongols' strategy often involved starving cities out, cutting off their food and water supplies, and forcing them into submission. Additionally, the Mongols were skilled at engineering, and they would often build their own siege weapons or repair existing ones during their campaigns. This adaptability in siege tactics allowed them to capture even the most well-fortified cities. The Mongols and their army structure. The Mongol military was also structured in a way that maximized its potential. At the top, the Khagan emperor commanded the entire Mongol army, but underneath him, a highly organized and efficient system of generals, commanders, and warriors ensured that orders were carried out swiftly and effectively. The Mongols maintained strict discipline within their ranks, and soldiers were expected to follow orders without hesitation. One of the key features of the Mongol military structure was its reliance on loyalty and merit. Soldiers who performed well were often rewarded with land and power, creating a system of incentives that motivated the Mongol army to perform at its highest level. Genghis Khan, for example, promoted individuals based on their abilities rather than their family lineage, leading to a military that was made up of the best and brightest warriors in the empire. The Mongols also relied heavily on intelligence officers and scouts to gather information. These scouts would travel ahead of the main army to assess the situation and ensure that the Mongols knew the terrain, the local population, and the best routes for movement. This use of intelligence was critical in giving the Mongols an advantage over their enemies. The legacy of Mongol warfare. The legacy of Mongol warfare was vast and long-lasting. While the Mongol Empire itself began to fragment after the death of Genghis Khan and the fall of his successors, the tactics and strategies they employed continued to influence military leaders for centuries. The Napoleonic Wars in the 18th and 19th centuries saw the resurgence of many Mongol strategies, such as the use of mobile cavalry, hit-and-run tactics, and rapid deployment of forces. Additionally, Mongol military tactics were passed down through various cultures and empires that interacted with the Mongols. The Ottoman Empire, for example, adopted many Mongol cavalry techniques, while the Russian Empire incorporated aspects of Mongol governance and military strategy into its own system. Even in China, the legacy of Mongol military practices influenced the Ming dynasty, which had to defend against invaders using strategies adapted from Mongol warfare. Mongol tactics also influenced the development of modern warfare, especially in the use of psychological tactics and speed. Their emphasis on speed, coordination, and adaptability laid the groundwork for modern military doctrines. In addition to their military prowess, the Mongols were responsible for fostering trade, cultural exchange, and the movement of knowledge across Eurasia. The Pax Mongolica allowed for the free flow of ideas, religions, and technologies, contributing to the Renaissance in Europe and the Islamic Golden Age. The Mongol Empire wasn't just a military force. It was a bridge between worlds, facilitating the exchange of goods, culture, and intellect that changed the course of human history. The Mongol legacy in modern military strategy. Today, the Mongols' military legacy still resonates in modern military strategies, especially in terms of mobility and psychological tactics. Their ability to adapt to changing circumstances, use intelligence effectively, and maintain discipline and loyalty within the ranks are strategies that are still taught in military academies worldwide. The Mongol way of war, founded on speed, efficiency, and psychological warfare, is a reminder that military success often lies not in the sheer size of an army, but in its ability to outthink and outmaneuver its enemies. The Mongol Empire, despite its relatively short lifespan, had a profound and lasting impact on political structures and governance practices across Eurasia. The methods of rule employed by Genghis Khan and his descendants not only helped them create the largest contiguous empire in history, but they also set the stage for political developments in the centuries to follow. The Mongols' ability to govern a vast, diverse empire spanning multiple continents, cultures, and religions was no small feat. Their model of governance, law enforcement, and military organization influenced countless future empires, from the Ottoman Empire to Russia and beyond. Genghis Khan, known for his extraordinary leadership, was not just a conqueror but a visionary ruler. His ability to manage the governance of an enormous empire was one of his most significant achievements. He instituted a meritocratic system in which individuals were promoted based on their skills and loyalty rather than their noble lineage, a groundbreaking concept in a world where hereditary succession often dictated power. The Mongols created a system where laws and regulations were strictly enforced, yet they also adopted aspects of the cultures they conquered. Genghis Khan's legal code, the Yasa, was an attempt to bring unity and order to his diverse empire. Although much of the Yasa is lost to history, it is known that the code promoted loyalty, discipline, and respect for authority, while also protecting trade and maintaining order in an increasingly interconnected world. One of the most striking aspects of Mongol governance was their ability to maintain cultural diversity while enforcing a strong central authority. Genghis Khan's empire was remarkably inclusive for its time, embracing religious tolerance and integrating various cultural practices into the Mongol system. The Mongols were pragmatic rulers. They did not impose their nomadic traditions on the settled civilizations they conquered. Instead, they recognized the value of the administrative structures, trade networks, and technological innovations of those civilizations. This adaptability in governance became one of the defining features of Mongol rule. Autocracy and centralized power. Though the Mongol Empire was initially built on the basis of tribal unity and cooperation, as the empire expanded, the Mongols adopted an increasingly autocratic style of governance. This centralization of power would become a hallmark of later empires that emerged in the wake of the Mongol collapse. One of the key features of Mongol governance was the centralized authority wielded by the Khagan Great Khan, who held absolute power over military, political, and judicial matters. This centralization would influence future empires, particularly in Russia. For example, the Tsars of Russia would adopt many elements of Mongol governance, including the reliance on autocracy and absolute power. Ivan the Terrible, in particular, drew inspiration from Mongol rule when he established himself as the first Tsar of Russia. His use of force and centralized control echoed the tactics and policies of the Mongol Khans who had once ruled over Russia. The Mongols' centralized power also shaped the Ottoman Empire, where sultans held absolute control, much like the Mongol Khans. The Ottoman system of governance, with its reliance on a strong, absolute ruler and a network of loyal officials, mirrored the Mongol model in many ways. The influence of Mongol law and justice. Another crucial aspect of Mongol rule was their approach to law and justice. The Mongols recognized the importance of a legal system that could be uniformly applied across a vast and diverse empire. While the Yasa was not a codified legal code in the way modern law is understood, it was a framework that emphasized strict adherence to authority and swift punishment for wrongdoers. The Mongols' use of legal enforcement was vital in maintaining control over their vast empire, and it set the stage for the more formalized legal systems of later empires. The Mongols also introduced the idea of military tribunals, where soldiers could be tried for their actions on the battlefield. This system helped ensure discipline and fairness in the ranks, preventing corruption and ensuring that Mongol soldiers remained loyal to their commanders. This model would later influence military justice systems in both the Russian and Ottoman empires, where military law and civil law were sometimes intertwined. Another significant element of Mongol law was the protection of trade and commerce. The Mongols understood that a thriving economy was essential to the success of their empire. They took steps to ensure that merchants and traders were safe from the threat of robbery and exploitation. This protection of commerce was one of the reasons why the Silk Road flourished under Mongol rule, and why the Mongols were able to foster such a robust global economy. Legacy in Russian autocracy and the rise of Tsarism. The most direct legacy of Mongol rule and governance is arguably the development of autocratic rule in Russia. For over 2 centuries, the Golden Horde, a Mongol Khanate, ruled over Russia. During this time, the Muscovite princes became increasingly accustomed to the Mongol model of governance. The Russian princes were required to pay tribute to the Mongols and submit to their military authority, but in exchange, they were allowed to retain their rule over local lands. As the Muscovite princes grew in power, particularly under Ivan the Great, they began to see themselves as the true successors to the Mongols, adopting the centralization of power and the autocratic rule that had been a hallmark of Mongol governance. Ivan III, for example, famously refused to pay tribute to the Mongols in 1480, signaling the end of Mongol dominance over Russia. However, the autocratic style of rule that was central to Mongol governance became ingrained in Russian politics. The Tsars of Russia adopted many aspects of Mongol governance, including the reliance on centralized control, absolute power, and the use of military tribunals to maintain order. This legacy of Mongol autocracy persisted throughout the history of the Russian Empire, influencing the way Russia was ruled for centuries. The Mongol influence on the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, which would later become one of the most powerful and enduring empires in history, also borrowed heavily from Mongol governance. The Ottomans, like the Mongols, were a nomadic people who rose to power through military conquest. In the early stages of Ottoman rule, the sultans adopted Mongol-style military organization and governance, which allowed them to expand their territory and consolidate power. Much like the Mongols, the Ottomans established a strong centralized government and a militaristic bureaucracy to govern their vast empire. The Ottoman sultans were absolute rulers, and their authority was unquestioned, mirroring the centralized power of the Mongol Khans. The Ottoman military, with its elite cavalry and highly organized structure, also drew inspiration from Mongol military practices. Mongol contribution to modern governance and statecraft. Beyond the direct influence on Russia and the Ottoman Empire, the Mongols' contribution to modern governance and statecraft was substantial. Their system of centralized rule, legal enforcement, and bureaucratic organization laid the foundation for later systems of modern autocracy. The use of merit in military and administrative appointments, the focus on law and order, and the recognition of the importance of commerce all contributed to the development of the modern state. In many ways, the Mongol approach to governance presaged the centralized states that would emerge in Europe, Russia, and the Middle East in the centuries that followed. The Mongol model of governance, which integrated elements of nomadic tradition with the complex bureaucracies of the societies they conquered, offered a powerful blueprint for future empires. Conclusion: the enduring legacy of Mongol governance. While the Mongol Empire may have fragmented in the 14th and 15th centuries, the influence of its governance and administrative practices lived on. From Russia to the Ottoman Empire, from Central Asia to China, the Mongol model of centralized authority, military prowess, and bureaucratic efficiency left a profound imprint on the political systems of future empires. The Mongols may have been conquerors, but they were also astute rulers who understood the necessity of effective governance, and their legacy continues to shape political systems to this day. The Mongol Empire may be most famous for its military conquests, but its legacy also includes significant contributions to the arts, particularly in the fields of architecture and design. The Mongols, in their conquest of vast territories, absorbed and combined the architectural traditions of the Chinese, Persian, Central Asian, and European worlds, resulting in a unique fusion that would have a lasting impact on the regions they ruled. While the Mongols themselves were originally a nomadic people with a simple architectural style, they quickly embraced the grandeur of the cities they conquered. Kublai Khan's establishment of the Yuan dynasty in China brought Mongol influence into the world of Chinese architecture, particularly in the imperial city of Dadu, modern-day Beijing. Under Kublai Khan, China saw the introduction of Mongol-style palaces, which incorporated elements of both Mongol and Chinese design. In Persia, the Mongols were heavily influenced by the Islamic architectural tradition, particularly the Persian style, which featured domes, arches, and intricate tilework. Ilkhanid rulers such as Ghazan Khan embraced Persian architecture, commissioning grand mosques, palaces, and caravanserais that showcased both the influence of Islamic traditions and Mongol military power. The tomb of Ulje II in Sultaniya, a prominent example of Mongol-era architecture, blends Persian and Mongol influences, creating a new style that would leave a lasting mark on Central Asian architecture. Perhaps the most famous example of Mongol architecture is the city of Samarkand, which flourished under the rule of Tamerlane Timur, a descendant of Genghis Khan. Samarkand, once a key city on the Silk Road, became a stunning center of architecture, renowned for its mosques, madrasas, and palaces. Tamerlane's projects combined elements from Mongol, Persian, and Turkish traditions, making Samarkand one of the most beautiful cities in the medieval world. The Registan, a vast square surrounded by monumental buildings, stands as a testament to the artistic synthesis that took place under Mongol influence. As the Mongols established their rule over large territories, they helped to spread these architectural styles, and the Mongol Empire became a conduit for cultural exchange. The incorporation of Mongol-style structures into the architecture of Russia, China, and Persia helped create a lasting architectural tradition that continues to influence these regions today. Mongol influence on literature, the spread of ideas and cultural exchange. The Mongols' impact on literature and intellectual life is less discussed, but it was no less significant. Under Mongol rule, there was a flourishing of cultural exchange, with writers, poets, and scholars from different cultures converging in the great cities of the Mongol Empire. This exchange was particularly notable in the Ilkhanate, where scholars from Persia, China, and the Islamic world shared ideas and translated works of philosophy, science, and literature. Persian poets like Rumi and Hafiz were celebrated under the Ilkhans, and many Mongol rulers became patrons of the arts and literature. The Mongols played a crucial role in preserving and translating Arabic and Persian works, helping to ensure that the literary traditions of the Islamic world were spread and incorporated into the Mongol Empire. In China, the Mongol Empire's involvement in patronizing the arts and literature was significant. Kublai Khan's court welcomed Chinese scholars, who were employed to write historical records and poetry in both Mongol and Chinese languages. The Mongol rulers' encouragement of the arts and literature led to a blending of Mongol traditions with Chinese scholarship, creating a unique synthesis that shaped the intellectual life of the Yuan dynasty. The Mongols' impact on the Silk Road also played a role in the dissemination of literary works. By ensuring the safety of merchants and scholars traveling across the empire, the Mongols helped to facilitate the exchange of ideas and texts between Europe, Central Asia, China, and the Middle East. Marco Polo, the famous Venetian explorer, wrote of his experiences at the court of Kublai Khan, providing a unique insight into the Mongol world that would later influence European writers and historians. Artistic contributions and the synthesis of cultures. In addition to architecture and literature, the Mongol Empire also contributed to the development of art in the regions it controlled. The Mongols were avid patrons of the visual arts, and their courts sponsored the work of artists and craftsmen from across the empire. The Ilkhans in Persia, for instance, supported the creation of stunning miniature paintings and illuminated manuscripts, which blended Persian, Mongol, and Islamic artistic traditions. These artworks depicted a rich variety of subjects, from courtly life to religious iconography, and they helped to preserve the artistic heritage of the regions they represented. In China, the Mongols' patronage of the arts led to the flourishing of ceramics, painting, and calligraphy. Kublai Khan, who was a great admirer of Chinese art, encouraged the blending of Mongol and Chinese artistic styles, leading to the creation of unique artistic expressions that combine both Mongol and Chinese elements. Chinese painting, for example, evolved during this period, with Mongol influence blending into traditional Chinese landscape art. Mongol influence on art was also seen in the spread of Islamic art into regions they conquered. As the Mongol Empire expanded into the Middle East, Central Asia, and China, Islamic architecture and art began to influence the Mongol courts, blending with Mongol traditions to create a unique style that influenced regions well beyond the Mongol Empire's borders. The Mongol patronage of the arts contributed to the creation of a cosmopolitan culture that spanned across continents, resulting in the development of a highly distinctive artistic synthesis that reflected the diverse peoples, cultures, and religions under Mongol rule. Mongol legacy in the arts today. The Mongol influence on art, literature, and architecture is still visible in the world today. Many of the architectural masterpieces built during the Mongol period, such as the Registan in Samarkand, the Kambalik Beijing, and the Mausoleum of Tamerlane, continue to awe visitors with their grandeur and intricate design. These structures serve as symbols of the Mongol Empire's cultural legacy and are an important part of the architectural heritage of Central Asia and China. In literature, the Mongol Empire's role in fostering intellectual exchange helped to spread the literary traditions of the Islamic world in China, which continues to shape modern writing. Mongol-influenced literature and historical accounts of the period, such as the writings of Marco Polo and Persian poets, continue to serve as important sources of knowledge and inspiration for historians and scholars. The arts and culture of the Mongol Empire, with their blend of traditions, serve as a testament to the Mongols' ability to foster cultural exchange and integration. They not only created a world where trade and intellectual ideas flourished, but also helped shape the artistic and literary traditions that continue to resonate in the modern world. The Mongol Empire, at its peak, was the largest contiguous empire the world had ever seen. It spanned from the Pacific Ocean in the east to the Caspian Sea in the west, covering vast areas of China, Central Asia, Persia, Russia, and Eastern Europe. This empire, forged by Genghis Khan and his successors, was a remarkable achievement of military prowess, governance, and cultural exchange. However, despite its immense success, the empire did not survive long as a unified entity after the death of its founder. When Genghis Khan passed away in 1227, the empire was left in the hands of his sons and grandsons. His death marked the beginning of a period of succession crises and internal struggles that would lead to the eventual fragmentation of the Mongol Empire into several separate khanates. Genghis Khan's vision of a unified empire under one ruler began to unravel as his descendants pursued their own ambitions and power struggles. One of the main reasons for the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire was the size of the territory. Genghis Khan had successfully unified the Mongol tribes and established a powerful empire, but it was too vast to be governed effectively under a single ruler. The empire was divided into four major khanates. The Yuan dynasty in China, ruled by Kublai Khan. The Ilkhanate in Persia, ruled by Hulagu Khan and his descendants. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, ruled by descendants of Genghis Khan's son, Chagatai. The Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe, ruled by the descendants of Genghis Khan's grandson, Badu Khan. While these khanates shared a common Mongol heritage and retained the nomadic Mongol traditions, they were increasingly independent of one another. This political fragmentation was further compounded by the vast cultural and geographic differences between the regions. The Mongol rulers of these khanates had to deal with different peoples, religions, and administrative systems, which made it difficult to maintain the unity that Genghis Khan had achieved. Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty, a Mongol empire in China. Among the most prominent of the Mongol descendants was Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, who founded the Yuan dynasty in China. Kublai's reign marked the Mongols' most significant achievement in China, where they established a ruling dynasty that lasted from 1271 to 1368. However, Kublai's efforts to integrate Mongol and Chinese cultures were met with significant resistance from the native Chinese population. The Mongols, though highly successful as conquerors, were still viewed as foreign rulers by many in China. The Ming dynasty eventually rose to power, overthrowing the Yuan dynasty and ending Mongol rule in China. The collapse of the Yuan dynasty was part of the broader decline of Mongol power, which had been weakened by internal strife, economic hardship, and natural disasters. The Ilkhanate and the decline of Mongol power in the Middle East. In Persia and the surrounding regions, the Ilkhanate was established by Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, after his successful conquests in the Middle East. The Ilkhanate was initially a major political and military power, but it also began to fracture after the death of Ghazan Khan in 1304. The Ilkhanate faced internal instability, with succession struggles and increasing pressure from external enemies. Tamerlane Timur, a descendant of Genghis Khan, launched a series of devastating campaigns in the late 14th century, further weakening the Ilkhanate and contributing to its eventual collapse. By the early 15th century, the Ilkhanate had disappeared, and the region was left politically fragmented, paving the way for new empires like the Safavids. The Golden Horde and the decline of Mongol rule in Russia. The Golden Horde, which ruled over much of Russia and Eastern Europe, was perhaps the most enduring of the Mongol khanates. Established by Badu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, the Golden Horde dominated the Russian principalities for over 2 centuries. However, the Mongol yoke in Russia was not unchallenged. The Grand Duchy of Moscow, led by Ivan the Great, grew in power and began to assert its independence from the Mongol rulers. In 1480, Ivan III famously refused to pay tribute to the Golden Horde, marking the end of Mongol domination in Russia. The Golden Horde weakened due to succession disputes, internal strife, and attacks from Tamerlane. By the early 16th century, the once mighty Golden Horde had fractured into smaller khanates, and Russia emerged as a new power in the region, eventually forming the Russian Empire. The Chagatai Khanate, division and decline. The Chagatai Khanate, which ruled over Central Asia, also experienced a slow decline after Genghis Khan's death. Unlike the more unified Mongol territories in China and Persia, the Chagatai Khanate was plagued by internal conflicts between its Mongol rulers and local populations, particularly in the western part of the empire. In the 15th century, the Chagatai Khanate split into 2 parts, the western part, centered in Transoxiana, and the eastern part, in the Altai Mountains. The western portion of the Khanate saw the rise of local Turkish rulers, who eventually established their own states, while the eastern portion became increasingly isolated and disconnected from the rest of the Mongol world. By the mid-15th century, the Chagatai Khanate had ceased to exist as a unified political entity. The rise of new powers and the legacy of the Mongols. As the Mongol Empire fragmented, new powers rose in its former territories. The Ottoman Empire began its expansion in the early 14th century, eventually becoming a dominant force in the Middle East and Europe. The Ming dynasty took over China in the 14th century, pushing the Mongols out and beginning a new era in Chinese history. In Russia, the Muscovite princes used the experience of Mongol rule to strengthen their centralized power, ultimately leading to the formation of the Russian Empire. Despite the decline of the Mongol Empire, the legacy of the Mongols continued to influence the political, cultural, and military landscapes of the regions they once ruled. The Mongol system of governance, based on merit, centralized authority, and efficient communication, would be adopted by later empires and states. The Mongol Empire's impact on trade, particularly the Silk Road, laid the foundation for the global exchange of goods and ideas that would continue to shape the modern world. Moreover, the Mongol legacy in military strategy, particularly the use of mounted cavalry, speed, and psychological warfare, would influence military tactics for centuries to come. Even as the Mongol Empire fractured, the military innovations they introduced would resonate in the tactics of later empires and armies. The end of the Mongol era, reflections on a revolutionary empire. The fall of the Mongol Empire marked the end of an era, but the Mongols' achievements in unification, trade, and cultural exchange would resonate through the centuries. The Mongol Empire brought together Eurasia, fostering a period of peace and prosperity that allowed for the free flow of goods, ideas, and cultures across vast distances. Though the empire splintered into various khanates, each with its own trajectory, the Mongol legacy lived on. The Mongols were not just conquerors, but also catalysts for the integration of diverse cultures and regions. Their influence continues to be felt in the political systems, military structures, and cultural practices of the nations they once ruled.